as a social worker, how were you able to like save up that much money? Like, what were you doing to like scrounge and be able to?
Yeah, when I worked at LA County Jail, I'd work like 10 hours of overtime every week, and within a few years, I was able to save up about $50,000. So I spent about $16,000 of that buying that duplex, and then I spent another $20,000 renovating it.
You weren't living in the duplex, right? You were just like renting, or you were?
Yeah, I did move into it. I used an FHA loan, so I moved into it and I renovated it right away, and then I lived in it for about a year before I moved out and put a tenant in place.
Have you like kept that property?
I actually sold it this past year right before the market shifted. So I was going to trade it in. I was going to 1031 into a fourplex. Within that weekend, the interest rates went up. And at the same time, I got a ginormous tax bill, which means you made a lot of money. Which I decided, well, I guess I'll just pay that tax bill because I suddenly have a few $100,000. But yeah, that one plex that I spent $35,000 all in returned to me $250,000 4 years later.
Hey guys, welcome to the Realized Gains podcast. I'm Stephen Tran. I'm an Oregon and Washington realtor, and I invest in multifamily and short-term rentals.
Hey everyone, I'm your co-host Jordan Lee, mortgage lender licensed in about 9 or 10 states. I'm based here in Portland, Oregon, and I invest in single-family homes, and we're in the process of getting a duplex as well.
Excited. And Jordan, who did we interview today?
Oh yeah, we had a really good interview. I went to an event about a month and a half ago, and I met Melissa Dorman, who was speaking there, and I was like, oh man, you did a great job speaking about mindset, manifestation, and investing in real estate. So I wanted to have her come on the show and share her story with you guys.
Yeah, no, she has a really great story. She's coming from the world of social work, and then decided that she wanted to be a real estate investor with very little money. So she has an amazing story, starting with very little, just getting in, having the right mindset, just get going. And like I said, she's made amazing progress in the last 5 to 6 years with her real estate portfolio, her real estate team. I mean, creating a coaching program, a book, etc. So, I mean, it's an amazing program, amazing example of what you can do if you put your mind to it. So,
yep, this is a great episode. Tune in if you want to learn more about mindset.
Hey guys, welcome to the Realized Gains podcast. This is episode 58. I'm Stephen Tran.
And I'm your co-host Jordan Lee, and we are super excited to have Melissa Dorman on the show today. Hey, you want to give us a quick introduction? I know you're not from Portland, so you're gonna maybe tell your story about how you got here, and then maybe eventually talk a little bit about how you got into real estate.
Yeah, sure. So I'm originally from LA. I was a social worker for a long time, and my ex-wife at the time, she got into Portland State University. And I just started getting into real estate, learning about stuff, and when I looked at the numbers in Portland versus LA, getting started as a real estate investor, I realized Portland would be an excellent spot to land.
Okay, and what about, I don't hear a lot of like social workers coming into real estate. Talk to me about that leap, and where did that, I mean, obviously the skills though, I think there's a lot of skill set that's similar. How did that transfer take place, or what kind of drew you towards real estate?
Yeah, that's a great question. I was working in LA County Jail at the time, and I was processing inmates, and jail, you have a lot of downtime, even when you're a social worker.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I would have, because I would just be waiting for inmates.
So you were a captive there in the jail, like you were only worked for them. It wasn't like interesting.
Yeah. So I was just processing inmates as they came in, which is unpredictable. So I had a lot of downtime between that. And at the time, my family, I was going through a crisis. My dad had Alzheimer's, and he was getting sicker and sicker. And for a lot of people that don't know, it's like $7,000 a month for a full-time caretaker to come in and start taking care of somebody who has, dementia and that sort of thing. And so my family didn't have the resources. They hadn't prepared adequately, and I was a brand new social worker, not making even $7,000 a month, let alone.
The income from a social worker isn't exactly able to support that either.
So I realized, wow, I really need to figure this out. Like, my dad was the hardest working man I knew. He'd worked 50 years as a roofer, and 6-7 days a week with nothing to show for it. And that was my big wake up call. I started studying how to build wealth, and I stumbled into real estate as a get rich slow and dumb process. It's not that hard.
Oh, interesting. So it was more, you kind of got into it from the perspective of, okay, I need to like figure out a way to have sustainable finance. And then you looked at a few different options, but real estate was the one that kind of made sense to you.
Yeah, it was the easiest, most practical way. You know, you can get into stocks and that sort of thing. A lot of the stuff is much more technical versus real estate. It's a business model that's been done many, many times. There's so many landlords. There's different ways to do it, of course, but it's a pretty simple business plan.
Yeah, I mean, I think we all understand how like renting and owning property works compared to like, you know, doing some sort of weird trading strategies, right? Yeah,
exactly.
Okay, cool. And so you came up to Portland. You were already interested in real estate investing at that point. Were you planning on becoming a real estate agent as well, or was it kind of the natural progression, or how did that part work?
Yeah, so basically I moved up to Portland, and before that I'd spent a year, about 20 hours a week while I was working in the jails, in between inmates, just waiting, and I started reading books, listening to podcasts, and just kind of growing my knowledge for a whole year. And then when I moved up to Portland, I started hitting the ground running. So I sent out some direct mail, and within a few months I was in contract on my first duplex.
Wow.
And I was so excited, but I knew nothing. So I like literally found a few investors in Portland, and I said, hey, can you do the walkthrough with me and let me know what you think?
Really?
And good friend Mike Nuss, who's a local guy here, he walked through and he looked at me and said, if you don't buy it, I will. And so I realized at that moment that I had a gem.
And how did you like get connected to the community, the real estate community? Because I know for a lot of people that are like trying to get their toes in, it's kind of it's a hard thing because like you want to be able to trust people, but you kind of don't know where to look.
Yeah. I just started looking online on BiggerPockets and trying to see which sort of real estate events were local. And then literally day 2 of getting here, I started going to what's now called Investor Lab. Which Mike runs, yeah. And so that became a big source of networking for me. I started meeting people and getting to know their stories, and that's why Mike was able to walk through with me.
Yeah, they do a great job.
So when you came over here, were you still doing social work? Did you like transfer a job here, or?
Yeah, great question. So when I first came up here, I actually was working in Salem at the psych ward. So similar forensic social work, helping folks get sane before trial, basically. And so I did that for about a year as I found that first property. And after I bought that property, about 2 months later, the tenant had moved out, and I got the call that my dad was dying. And so for me, that was a pivotal moment. You know, I saw my dad as this amazing guy who had worked so hard in his life, and at the end having nothing to show for it. So when he passed away, I took some FMLA, and I just really thought about my life choices, and I decided in that moment that I wasn't going to go back to work as a social worker full-time, that I would do whatever it took to build my own portfolio and to become an investor. So it was a bold move. Honestly, I only had about $16,000 in my bank account at the time. It's not something I would advise anybody to do, but I jumped into becoming first an investor, but I got my Realtor license so I could facilitate the off-market transactions that I was doing.
Okay, 2 questions. FMLA.
Yeah.
What? Explain that.
Oh, FMLA is, I think, Family Medical Leave Act. It's like when you have a crisis in your family, you're allowed to take some time off of work, and sometimes they'll pay you some different circumstances. But I took that because my dad had died. And
like $16,000, you say that's not a lot. It doesn't feel like a lot now. I remember when I got into real estate, I thought I had a lot. When I had $10,000, it was like in my bank account, it was the most I'd ever had, and I was like, oh yeah, I got plenty. Like you said, it wasn't enough.
It wasn't enough.
As a social worker, how were you able to like save up that much money? Like, what were you doing to like scrounge and be able to?
Yeah, when I worked at LA County Jail, I'd work like 10 hours of overtime every week, and within a few years, I was able to save up about $50,000, which was my initial nest egg. So I spent about $16,000 of that buying that duplex, and then I spent another $20,000 renovating it. And so when everything was said and done and my bills were paid, I had $16,000 left.
Okay, so you were pretty much just any opportunity to work extra hours, you were pulling it in.
Yeah, whatever I needed to get started.
So were you weren't living in the duplex, right? You were just like renting, or you were?
Yeah, I did move into it. I used an FHA loan, so I moved into it and I renovated it right away. Really shined it up, and then I lived in it for about a year before I moved out and put a tenant in place.
Oh, nice. And have you like kept that property and are continuing to rent it, or did you trade it, or what did you do with it?
Yeah, great question. So I actually sold it this past year right before the market shifted. And my idea at the time was I was going to trade it in. I was going to 1031 into a fourplex. And just the way the market went within that weekend, the interest rates went up. And all of a sudden, no fourplex penciled. And at the same time, I got a ginormous tax bill, which means you made a lot of money, which is a good thing.
Yep.
And so I decided, well, I guess I'll just pay that tax bill because I suddenly have a few $100,000. But yeah, that one plex that I spent, I guess maybe $35,000 all in, returned to me $250,000 4 years later.
Wow, that's amazing.
Incredible.
Yeah.
I mean, timing is obviously important, but it goes to show that when you buy a place and remodel it,
it builds value.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. And so you said you quit your job. You have $16,000 in your bank account. I mean, what was your next step to get started as an investor? Like, what did you do to change your life at that point? Because $16,000 can't really buy you a lot.
Yeah, so I teamed up with a real estate investor and also an attorney who is a real estate investor. And what we did is the attorney would find the default of notice. So that's a notice that's sent to somebody when they haven't paid their mortgage. It's not a pre-foreclosure letter, but it just starts the process of foreclosure. And so this is not public knowledge or anything, but I would take those and then I would skip trace people. I would cold call 10 hours a week and just try to get in their living room. And to be honest, it was a lot like social work. The people that I was coming into, they had big life problems. They were in denial about their house being in foreclosure and they didn't want to make a move, but I would sit with them, talk with them, and help them.
Of those people, like, how many of them could understand what that letter meant? Because for me, when I'm looking at disclosures with my clients all the time, the legal language it's like a joke. Like, nobody can understand. Like, even I'm looking at that, I'm like, I don't know. I have to ask somebody because to me, it looks exactly like it's saying one thing, but it's totally not what it's saying. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. And a lot of these folks, this wasn't the first time they got that letter. I mean, I met people that were in foreclosure for 7 years, 10 years, and they were used to being behaviorally trained that I don't need to pay my mortgage and I can still live here for 10 years.
Jeez.
So when I showed up in their living room and I was like, no, you're really going to go to foreclosure this time. Everything's starting to go in that direction. I'd really like to help you, cash for keys, do something creative here so we can get you out of your home other than a sheriff showing up, which is what would happen. And so I did that for about a year, and after a year, it just felt really hard. These are really, really devastating situations. And I did about 15 of those transactions, and I learned a lot. But I realized after that I really wanted to just do something more traditional. So I started a retail level, residential realtor team after that.
So you did 15 transactions where you were picking up these properties yourself? Okay.
Not myself. So at the time I was either giving them to the attorney or to my business partner. And it was under the idea that eventually I would get to keep some of these deals, but we got 15 in and I did my count and I had 0. And that's when I realized, okay, I'm doing a lot of work and not getting what I was promised. So it's time to end this partnership and start a new one.
Doing a lot of the grunt work, but not getting any of the equity out of it.
Yeah. It was a great experience, though. A lot of mentorship. I learned a ton. I made deals out of that for myself that weren't part of that process, so it was worth it.
It's a great mentality to have, right?
Yeah.
So you went on to start your own team, and what made you want to do that over just going off on your own and selling houses, and why did you go the team route?
Yeah, so I basically was in the middle of a divorce with my ex-wife, and I was so used to making about $3,000 a month as a social worker, and all of a sudden I owed her $2,000, and after taxes that would be $3,000 that I need. And so all of a sudden I had to double my income, and so I thought, okay, I need to think strategically and bigger than I have been. And so I was in the middle of selling a fourplex, and the buyer agent who brought the buyer asked me out to drink afterwards and was kind of telling me about, he wanted me to be on his team and this sort of thing. And I just ended a business partnership where I wasn't being very appreciated.
Right.
And so I said, no, I won't work for you, but we could partner. And he was open to that idea. And so I sort of asked him, what are you bringing to the table? And he spout off a bunch of stats that I didn't understand because I wasn't used to being a residential realtor. I didn't know gross commit, all that stuff. And at the end of what he said, he's like, I make about $450 a year. And I was like, ding, ding, ding. That
makes sense to me.
I can work with that. And so It was great. We ended up, because I was so new in real estate, he didn't know my ability, nor did I.
Right.
So I created a nice waterfall structure for us where I said, if I double the income of the business, we'll start 80-20. All the profit, 80% goes to him, 20% to me. But if I double the business, if we're making 900 collectively, then I want to be 60-40 partners. And if I triple the business, then I want to be 50-50. And so, he signed on that thinking like, that's never going to happen. But 6 months later, I did double the business.
Wow. I mean, that's huge. And why would you say no to that? Right?
Yeah, I mean, exactly. It was mutually beneficial, and I tripled the business in 18 months. So, it was an incredible growth opportunity for both of us.
Can I ask, what were you showing for him to obviously take you to, to get drinks and talk about?
Oh, right. Yeah. So in that transaction, what ended up happening is the appraiser was a fool and said that the fourplex wasn't a fourplex. So I said, oh gosh, I've done this so many times. So I just went down to the city as an investor does. I showed the historical records that it had been originally a fourplex. I solved the problem in about 2 hours. The problem was going to blow up the whole transaction.
Right. Yeah.
And most realtors would be, I don't know what to do. They would be completely dumbfounded. But I just went that afternoon and fixed it. And he was like, whoa, you know what you're doing. So that's why he was interested.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what strategies did you pull into, getting into your realtor business? What strategies did you pull in to double the business, triple the business in that short amount of time?
Yeah, great question. So I was in a coaching program that advised me the first thing you do is you hire a virtual assistant, administrative assistant, and you teach them every single thing you possibly can on what they can do behind a computer, so that you're putting yourself as the best and highest use, which is in front of new clients. And so your focus is on lead generation and not on paperwork. And so that's what I did. I spent a long time. I created all these videos and I put them on a platform. And so every single task that I could possibly think of, we offloaded, and that just immediately opened up the floodgates for us to be able to work harder and make more money. And once I had a really solid admin in place, then one at a time, we'd hire an agent. Same sort of process. I had all these trainings built up, and they could get plugged right into the team. And then as soon as they were successful, we'd hire the next one and the next one.
Okay.
So a lot of systems.
And what was your your pull, or how did you recruit agents in a way like that? What was the draw?
We have a pretty generous package for folks. We provide a lot of the leads, so we pay for Zillow leads and that sort of thing. And then a lot of teams will only offer a buyer agent maybe 20% or 30%, but we start off at 50, and they have the opportunity to earn up to 65% of their commissions if they bring in the lead source or start doing a higher volume of leads or of transactions.
Okay, so it's more just we offer the leads, and then here's your kind of pay structure.
Yeah.
Okay, and you work in this is all in the umbrella of Living Room Realty? Okay.
Yeah, our teams at Living Room Realty were the Catalyst group.
Okay, got it.
Did you end up staying with that partner, or are you still working with that partner right now?
Yeah. His name's Yasha Noonberg. We've been business partners for 5 years.
Okay.
It's been a really amazing journey. We complement each other really well. Yeah.
Nice. And since then, what have you kind of been focusing on in terms of your investment strategy? I know from hearing you speak earlier, you had a pretty interesting story about getting into I think it was a 3 or 4plex in the Mississippi neighborhood with low money down. What have you been doing creatively to keep building your portfolio?
Yeah, I've really focused on creative financing, and so whether it be seller financing or I do a lot of private money lending on my current properties that have enough equity so that I can go buy another property conventionally. It's just a lot of creative strategies, integrating seller financing usually.
Okay, and how do you? A lot of our colleagues, friends, and other investors especially love the idea of seller financing. Typically what do we say? It's everyone wants to put zero down and get zero interest rate. But how do you, to me it's always it has to be a win-win scenario, right? For the seller and for the buyer. How do you go about seeking that out or structuring it? What would be some advice you would give on that?
Yeah, I think it's really important to focus on the other person's needs, desires, wants, and to really understand what it is you're crafting and tailoring to meet their needs. So in such a way that when you propose the idea, it almost sounds like it's coming from them because you've listened so well to what they need. And I think about it in terms of 4 levers. And so you have down payment, you have purchase price, you have the term, the length of the note, and you have the interest rate. And so when I'm talking to a seller, I'm trying to suss out what is their most important few levers. And whatever one's not important, then that's the ones I'm going to pull for myself in order to meet their needs and mine.
Right.
So that's kind of the path that I use.
Is there like one deal that you've done recently, or maybe that stands out in particular that would be a good example of how you kind of used that employed that strategy?
Yeah, so I'll share the one that I shared that night too. So I basically was cold calling for about 10 hours a week when I was initially in that first business that I started, and I came across a bankruptcy attorney. His name was Kelly, and I didn't really know that he was a bankruptcy attorney. I was calling what I didn't know was a dead guy at the time. But this turned out to be his attorney, and then he informed me that he was dead, and that was a little awkward. But we started up a conversation because he's a bankruptcy attorney, and I was a pre-foreclosure realtor, so a lot of the overlap in our clients. So we built this friendship on that. And one day, about 3-4 months into it, he texted me and asked me to do like a comparative market report to tell him how much his triplex was worth. And when I looked it up, I could see that he'd owned it for 20 years. And for me, that's it. That's like your flag. That's what you're looking for, somebody who owns a property for a long time and has a lot of equity. So when I showed up to do the walkthrough, he showed me all the units. 2 of them were vacant, and before I could even say anything to him, he actually turned to me and said, "I'd really like to seller finance this to somebody." So it was
had you ever talked to him about seller financing on other deals or anything?
No, I'd never brought it up. We were really casual friends at that point. And what's great is like 6 months prior to that, every single day in the morning, I would have this affirmation of I'm going to buy an off-market property using seller financing with little or no money down. And like
that was just like your manifestation in the morning or whatever. You're like, I'm gonna find this.
Yeah, because I didn't have very much money. I only had that $16,000, and I was quickly burning through that, and I was hardly making any money on these transactions as a realtor. And so I really needed to find something. And I wasn't really bank financeable. I just quit my job as a social worker, so I really needed this creative financing to work. So anyways, we sat down that night to iron out the details, and at first he wanted 10% down, which would be about $75,000, and I didn't have it. And so I said, well, how much would you need to foreclose on me?
Very smart when you're talking to a bankruptcy attorney who knows how to do that.
Yeah, and so he thought about it for a second. He said about $15,000. I said, well, okay, let's do that. That's about a 2% down payment, by the way, for reference. And I said, great, well, why don't we do that? Because then you could use my own money to foreclose on me if I don't pay you. And he said, well, that makes a lot of sense. And besides, you can continue to make money on the principal if there's more of it there. So so he was open to that. And then another thing that I creatively used is I said, well, what about, you have 2 vacant units right now, right? So how am I going to pay you in 30 days or 15 days or whatever right after we close on this when I don't have that money coming in? So I asked him, how about you give me about 2 months to get them rented up, and we can put all of that principal and whatever I was going to pay you, and we can put it on the top of the loan. So you're going to make interest on interest. Doesn't that sound great? And he said, yeah, that sounds so great, and it makes a lot of sense. So what ended up happening is I didn't have $15,000. As mentioned before, I was very broke. So I made a phone call to some friends in LA who had seen my capabilities of managing money, and they lent me $10,000. And so I worked it out that I would pay them off in the first year with the cash flow of that property. The way that we had it structured, I would have enough money for that. And so I just had to come in with like $7,000 to closing, which was great.
Because the other 8 was
closing costs and the rest of the down payment. So what was great is I spent the initial 2 months re-renting those 2 units, and I recouped $6,500 of it. So by the time I actually owed him a payment, I was about $500 in on a triplex near Mississippi Avenue.
Amazing.
Yeah, that cash flowed.
On Mississippi, like in the popular area of Mississippi?
Just on the other side by interstate.
Oh,
so,
okay.
Yeah, like walking distance, but not quite, right on it.
I mean, that's still a great area.
Yeah.
And so how did you structure the seller financing? So this was a time market rates what were they in that time?
Like 4.
Okay, so rates are pretty low. So so you negotiated what on the loan finance?
Yeah, I did 5.5% interest only payments, and so that allowed it to cash flow really well, so I could pay off that first or the second mortgage, the $10,000, and also left some money on the table for me each month, so I could take care of the tenants really well, and was very responsible.
And you did it over how many years?
So that note I think was going to be about 5 years, but actually two years into it was going really well. But rates had dropped down to like 2-3%.
Yeah,
so all of a sudden my 5.5% wasn't looking so great.
It looks good now.
It looks good now, yeah.
That's so funny. Like at this time, we're like, that's just so greedy to think
Yeah, I
about
know,
that.
right? So I called him up and I said, hey, would you be open to doing something kind of creative with me? And by that point we'd had a few years together. They saw that I'd pay my payments every time on time, and that I was very responsible and growing my other business too, so they could trust me. And so I said, okay, well, I owe you about $700,000 left on that triplex. Would you be okay with me splitting that note, that promissory note, into two, so like about $350 each? And I'll take one of those notes and put it in second position on a few of my other properties, right?
Oh, so you were pushing it out.
Yeah, putting it on some other properties that had plenty of equity for
right.
plenty of cash flow, but it was going to not be on that triplex anymore, which meant that only $350,000 was remaining on the triplex.
And then you could do a conventional.
Yeah, so then I did a cash out refi, at like 4%,
right.
non-owner occupied, and
Yep.
I pulled out $205,000 from that triplex, and then I put it on a down payment for a 20 unit in Ohio. So it's like $500, ended up being 23 units. And about $2 million worth of real estate.
That's amazing. Oh my God.
Yeah, and it cash flowed.
This was over how long of a time period?
That was about 2 years.
Over 2 years.
About 2 years, yeah.
And I want to bring it back to basics. Like you mentioned that this bankruptcy lawyer had this property for 20 years, and you're like, this is exactly what I'm looking for. Like, why is it? Because he had so much equity in the property. Can you kind of explain that to our viewers?
Absolutely. So basically, what I'm looking for is somebody who has a lot of equity, who doesn't want to be a landlord anymore, and preferably they already understand what seller financing is, because I don't want to pitch anything to them. My goal is not to educate them about seller financing.
Yeah.
My goal is they already understand that, and they see it mutually beneficial.
So that's like real estate professionals,
Anybody
attorneys,
in the 70s.
attorneys.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, that's true. Older folks that have experienced higher rate time periods that that have made some real estate trades.
Yeah.
So those would all be kind of good targets for people that understand how seller finance works.
And so, in this situation, I'm assuming he just wanted to spread out his capital gains. So that's...
Yeah. If you think about his situation, it's like, why would he agree to all those crazy terms that I got? Well, let's focus on his situation. So in his situation, had he sold that on market at like $750, and after commissions maybe he would have about $730, then he'd pay taxes, he'd have about $540. So the return that he'd have to make on $540 would be an 8% return in order to make the exact same payment I was paying him at 5.5 on the whole amount. So it really was much more beneficial for him.
And so since then, do you still have some of those notes that are outstanding? So you're still paying him on those notes, so he's still just getting it regularly.
Yeah,
okay.
on that second position note, I'm still paying him on that. So he's getting good money on that, and he's lent me on other projects as well.
Oh, nice. So yeah, it's kind of at this point it's more of a partnership than anything, right?
Yeah. We're dear friends these days. Yeah.
Interesting.
That's
wow,
awesome.
I love that.
Yeah, a lot of people, in real estate, it's often like, oh, let's target the person who doesn't know better, or who's in a desperate situation, or is, at the end of their life and they're struggling, or whatever. It's always like looking for the person who's in despair. But seller financing is different. It's about finding the person who's your colleague, who understands what they're doing, who's intelligent, and who is just trying to craft something that works for us both. It's a much different demographic.
Right. Yeah, so there's definitely a lot of real estate and mortgage professionals that bought a bunch of homes, in the early 2000s, right, that are retiring now, that own them free and clear or close to it, that probably understand seller financing and are probably in this. I had a client just recently that I talked to that was like, yeah, I'll probably be interested in doing some seller financing in the next few years. So I think you make a great point about looking for somebody that understands it already instead of having to shove it down there. You want to do seller financing, right?
Yeah, it's a hard that's a hard pull there.
Yeah, I also think it's better on the conscience.
Yeah,
when
absolutely.
you do it that way, when you're working with somebody who knows what they're doing, instead of trying to explain. I still get overwhelmed with seller financing. I've been in real estate for like the last 5 years. So
it's technical.
Throwing that at somebody who is going through a personally bad situation financially, maybe a family situation that might be tough, and then trying to purchase a home from them and trying to educate them on that sounds like a lot of work and a lot of stress.
Yeah. It's better to find.
Yeah, I think we make it more complicated than it is, though, right? I mean, basically, you're just getting a loan from a person, right?
Yeah.
Instead of going through the more complicated process of getting it done through a bank and getting the underwriting done, and paying all these seven different entities that you need to pay when you're buying a house, right?
Yeah, it's actually much more simple just paying the seller directly, but because we've been so conditioned in society to always use a bank in order to make a large purchase,
right,
people are just weary of it because they don't understand how simple it is to put all that money back in their pockets versus Chase Bank or something.
Well, I'll say this. I mean, at the end of the day, you know what number you need to hit every single month in terms of the rents coming in and your payments that make sense for you. So it kind of gives you a good bar to say, I need to hit this, and if it doesn't get there, then it doesn't make sense to buy it with seller financing. If they can't reach your number, then, I mean, that's pretty much it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's kind of interesting because when you think of all those different levers that you can pull, a lot of people get really fixated on price. And like if you think about it, let's say there's a property worth $500,000 today. I'd pay $1 million for that if they gave me a 30-year loan.
Yeah.
Because it's going to be worth so much more than $1 million in 30 years.
Right.
As long as the other terms were good, if
I mean,
really
if you don't have to come in with any cash and you get a good interest rate, why not, right?
Yeah, as long as it, like your point, as long as it's penciling,
exactly.
I'm not so concerned about value. I'm more concerned about how do the numbers work.
Yeah. No, I play with that all the time. Like I've worked with, when I was first in real estate, I had a couple people who wanted to get into seller financing. I had no idea. And they kept throwing out offers that were crazy. Like, I'm going to pay $200,000 over, and I also want to put down, I don't know, $5,000.
Yeah,
exactly. I'm just like, how does this work?
Yeah. All day, that works.
No. It's like, and I want a 2% interest rate or something crazy. And so
those
I got a lot of bulks from the other agents and sellers too. So I didn't really understand what I was doing. It was just like when I was brand new in my career. So like that's why I still get overwhelmed, because I think about those times and I was like, I'm putting out this offer and I don't really understand it. So
Oh yeah.
Is there a way to do like a crash? Would you suggest anything for a crash course to learn seller financing other than just doing it? What is the best way to learn?
Yeah. So I actually learned from a guy named Greg Pinio. He has a program. It's called Power Players, and it's like a 4 or 5 day intensive program, and it teaches you how to negotiate, how to structure things in much more detail than we're going over today. And so that program really taught me to think differently and to also imagine that I could do something like buy an off-market triplex with $500.
Yeah. So when I heard you speak, last month, you mentioned a book, and I read that book, and one of my takeaways was like she was a coach, right? And she talked about if you're gonna coach at X level, you need to spend X amount of money and coach yourself, right? So it sounds like you, in part, in learning how to do real estate, you've invested in your education, and maybe some coaching as well too. And I think you have like a really good mindset. Do you want to talk a little bit about how that has that always been something that has been a part of you, or kind of recently you've gotten more into that, or how does that factor into your business?
Yeah, so I did a lot of self-educating initially, like with Bigger Pockets and podcasts like that and books and whatnot from the library. But there's only so much that you can teach yourself when it gets to that granular level of your actual business. I've really adopted some coaches. So for seller financing, Greg Pinio taught me a lot of things. He also has a great community of people that I would then spend time with who also thought like that and were doing deals that were structured creatively. So surrounding myself with people who were higher achieving than me, who knew more than me, was critical in my growth and development, because we really do become the sum of the 5 people that we spend time with. So I started putting that social pressure on me in a really positive way and started hanging out with people that were growing faster and bigger than I was. And then the other thing is, when I started my Realtor team, I also hired a coach to help me build that team. And I think coaching's really critical to, I do coaching now with other folks, and it's so important to have somebody asking those hard questions. And also they're going to see things that you could never even see because you haven't been there and you don't even know the question to ask. And so, it's been critical towards my growth and development as both a team owner and also in my own portfolio.
Interesting. Yeah. And is there like a rule of thumb in terms of like how much you feel like you should spend on time or like money investment into like, your personal coaching or personal growth and development versus like marketing and other types of spends that people do in their business practice?
I mean, I think every business is going to be a little different in that. I don't have like a percentage that I would spend, but I think what most people get wrong is they think if they do the coaching, they're going to get better. Or they think if they take the program that means they're going to get better, and they're wrong.
Right. It's not just a pay-to-play type thing.
Yeah, it's really critical. Whatever you invest in for your education, you have to be very invested in doing whatever they say to do.
Right.
Yeah.
And if you don't have that, then don't buy the next book. Like, don't even spend money on Amazon doing that. Like, you have to have the level of commitment of like, I'm going to do this program. I'm going to treat it like, like this is my new life mission, and I'm going to do exactly what they said, because if it has worked for them and many other people, then it's going to work for me too if I apply myself.
So it's more about, I mean, yes, it's important, the education, but you really got to apply it. I mean, it's like when I went to culinary school, most of the kids didn't want to be there.
Yeah.
And I distinctly remember that, and like most of them didn't get hired, right? Because that wasn't, they were there just because for whatever reason.
Yeah.
It's a lot of money to spend to not want to be there.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think that's the case for a lot of people.
Yeah, most people, I agree.
I mean, there's probably a ton of people that spend money on real estate education, but then never go and invest, right?
Yeah.
I see it all the time.
Yeah.
I think that's pretty common in our industry. That's why we have so much of a huge drop off in both realtors and lenders.
Yeah.
Especially when rates get bad.
Yeah, absolutely. Dropping like flies.
And you talked a little bit about like the process of manifestation and how you kind of wake up and you're like, okay, I'm gonna get this, find this seller, carry deal, and you do it every morning. How much of that is that something you still practice every day, and is there some sort of suggestion you have for people that are interested in that but kind of like maybe don't believe in it or feel weird about it?
Yeah. I really started implementing like affirmations and visualizations, and kind of the process of manifestation is retraining your brain to think and believe new thoughts and beliefs. And it sounds like, like same thing for hypnotism, actually. I just started seeing a hypnotist this year. Yeah. And people are always like, well, did you go to sleep? It's like, no, you're missing what hypnotism is. Hypnotism is teaching your brain to think differently using visual imagery and creating an experience so that you actually like have a lived experience that supports that belief. And
so it's kind of like a next level of manifestation, like someone's kind of helping you with that visual process and helping you manifest in a further way. Is that how? Yeah.
Like it's like the reason you're doing affirmations and visualizations and that sort of thing is because you have all of these lived experiences that tell you getting into real estate is going to be too scary.
Right.
Right. And you have like tons of people that have told you, our culture doesn't value it, that sort of thing. And so you have to overcome that by creating everyday experiences that tell you the opposite until you really start to believe it. And that actually takes a lot of time, because how long have you been conditioned to think the safest, quote unquote, safest thing to do is to find a job that you clock in and out of?
Right. It's that your subconscious is sitting there just telling you like, oh, this is going to fail.
It's not going to work.
This is going to fail. Even if your conscious mind's like, oh, I know I can make this. I know I can do it. There's part of you that's still like, you're gonna die. That whole situation. Yeah.
No, I mean, I totally get that, because I was stuck at my job for a long time, just shoving money into my 401k and my Roth, and it was like, I shouldn't jump into this real estate deal. And I mean, for me, it was because I had to. My parents went through a foreclosure and bankruptcy, and I had to buy my property, so I kind of like fell into it. And if I didn't have that moment, I would have never touched real estate.
Oh wow, yeah.
So I do. I mean, like I said, I really do like your idea of manifestation. But where do you get resources to learn that, or visualization, manifestation? Is there like one resource for that, or did you just go through multiple? Are there books or anything that you looked into?
Yeah. There's definitely like books and teachers. Dr. Joe Dispenza is a really great manifestation coach. He's sort of like the Tony Robbins of manifestation.
Okay.
He's got a really interesting story, because back in like 70s or 80s, he was he was cycling in a triathlon, and when a car hit him at 55 miles an hour and broke 6 of his vertebrae. And he was a chiropractor at the time, he had a chiropractor practice, and he talked to a bunch of surgeons, and they all said he'd never walk again, and they told him he'd have to do this really complicated surgery that would basically just preserve him either in like a sitting or sleeping position for the rest of his life. And he was like, no, I don't believe that. And he went home and like 4 hours a day, every day for like 10 weeks, he would just like visually reconstruct his spine in his mind's eye. And because he was a chiropractor, he knew what that looked like, right? All the different ligaments and bones and such. And so after 10 weeks, he actually started walking again. And after 12 weeks, he was back on his bicycle. And doctors do not understand how you could heal 6 ruptured vertebrae in 10 weeks because that's like not medically possible, but he did. And then he realized he wanted to switch careers and teach people how to manifest because he did that with his own body.
Yeah. Interesting. Huh. Yeah. So what are you working on for your manifestation now?
Yeah. So it's so funny because the reason that we met is I'd done this speech at the Salem real estate event, and we were talking in the back of the room, and there was a guy that was so skeptical about the process of manifestation and kept drilling me about like, but how does it work scientifically? And what is a vibration? Like sort of like going in, and you just turned to me and you said, well, what are you trying to manifest right now? And I said, well, I'm mostly trying to manifest, or not you, but the guy that he was with said, and I said, I'm mostly trying to manifest podcasts and speaking opportunities right now so I can get my message out. And not even 20 seconds later, you walked up to me and as this guy was drilling me, like, but how do you know? And you said, hey, I loved your talk. I'd love for you to be on my podcast. And in that moment, I was like, case in point. I put a vibration out there. I have an intent. I think about it often. And it just comes to me, not because I'm not trying. It's not a passive thing. It's like you're orienting your life towards this vision. I'm doing lots of active things that would get me onto a podcast.
Yeah, I was going to say, positive energy towards that. And I think that just kind of orientates your actions towards making those things happen.
Yes, exactly.
By, like I said, going to the speaking event. If you didn't have that intention of obviously being in more speaking events and getting on podcasts, you wouldn't put yourself in a position to put yourself out there.
Yeah, exactly.
So I used to think of manifestation and visualization as like kind of voodoo.
Yeah, totally.
I'm putting this energy out in the world, but at the end of the day, it's just orientating yourself towards action. In a sense.
Absolutely. You're preparing yourself for the opportunity when it arrives, and if you're not prepared for that, you will actually not even see it. It'll just pass right in front of you. But when you're actively training your mind to see opportunity and to recognize it, then when it comes, then you'll see it. And so what am I working on right now? So right now I'm actually working on starting a private practice and coaching services for other people, teach them how to do these same things. It's called Mental Wealth Therapist.
Oh, cool.
And so that'll be launching next week, and I'll start taking on either therapy or coaching clients. But I think that'll be really synergistic for, the speaking that I'm doing and also the real estate stuff that I'm doing. And I'm also working on a book right now.
Oh, fantastic. Yeah. Okay, cool.
Mm-hmm. Wow, you got so much going on. Obviously, you have your properties, you have your real estate team, you have your coaching. Obviously, you're doing podcasts and speaking opportunities. How do you manage everything?
Yeah, it's a great question. So part of my success is I've learned early on to delegate things. So I have a personal assistant that does a lot of my home responsibilities, and I also have a personal assistant that does most of my work responsibilities as a realtor. And so that frees me up to have the capacity to build other businesses and to envision the life that I want for myself.
Yeah, I like that, having one for the home and one for the work. That makes a lot of sense. So what? It sounds like you're working on a book. Real estate wise, what is your kind of? Are you to the point where you're no longer going crazy trying to find deals because you have that sort of passive income that you can kind of feel free to pursue other things like coaching and writing a book, or are you still kind of trying to even out your portfolio? What's your kind of, I guess, your 5-year or longer term plan in real estate?
Yeah, so the last few years I've mostly focused on putting money into more passive syndication deals. I'm kind of at my capacity for what I can self-manage in Portland, and then I have that 120 unit in Ohio. And so over the next few years, my goal is to continue to pour into more of those passive, cash flow centered funds, and then just consolidate over time, either selling things and trading it more for cash flow in those funds, or trading up and doing 1031 exchanging over time to keep that part of my portfolio growing.
I've seen that with some of the higher level investors that they kind of move towards syndications because it's just so much more passive. Maybe the return isn't quite the same, but you don't have to deal with it. Those seem to be like a little bit different in sort of the evaluation, in the sense that like you can't put your hands on them in the same way as a duplex or a triplex.
Yeah.
Is there some sort of process that you've followed for kind of vetting those deals, and is there an area that you focus on or a type?
That's a great question. So I was also very resistant to doing syndications because I really like having control of my projects and understanding all the minutia. But I had some friends that I met who retired when they were 30. So they make me look slow at 35. But they basically sold a handful of properties that they had bought while they were engineers here in Portland. And half of the money they invested in buying a whole bunch of, like kind of crappy houses in the South, basically. And the other half they invested in syndications. And the way that what they taught me is there's this group called the 506 group. And it's about a few thousand investors. Like average net worth is about 5 million. So you have, savvy folks who have been building wealth for a while. And collectively we do due diligence on these sponsors, so it's almost like a private Facebook, if you will, and
right.
we do third-party audits, we do background checks, we basically gather a lot of information, and collectively it reduces the risk because there's a lot of people looking at it at the same time.
I see. So you're kind of pooling your information. It'd be like when I ask a broker friend if we're trying to take on a new wholesaler. It's like, what's the deal
what
with
are
them?
they like?
Or do they close on time type thing?
Exactly.
And so all these syndications you're getting into, they're like ones for accredited investors, not just the friends and family syndications. Those ones I can't really trust.
Yeah, friends. Yeah, these are all for syndication, for accredited investors, basically. And so.
And can you also explain what an accredited investor is?
Yeah. So to become an accredited investor, it's not like you take a test or anything, although they have been promoting that you can start doing that. Basically, you just have to make, as a single person, $200,000 going 2 years back and expecting that to go forward. And everything counts: rental income, your job, even some of the benefits you get if you have a job that gives you benefits. But $200,000. If you're a couple, it needs to be $300,000. Or you can attain it by having $1 million in net worth. And so for most of the people that I'm talking to who are getting into real estate, they don't have the equity side, they don't have the net worth. But after a few properties, it doesn't take that many properties before you'd have $200,000 of passive, passive income coming in minus expenses, maybe not that much cash flow.
Right, but it's about the gross.
The gross income,
right? They don't care about all
exactly.
the mortgage interest and whatever else you're writing off.
Yeah, it's basically like 4 duplexes. Once you have 4 duplexes, you don't even need a job. Or 2 with a job.
And where would you get accredited? Like how do they check your, obviously, all the stuff? Like where would I go to get accredited?
Yeah, so there's websites that you can do that, and you just upload your taxes and they look at them. Also, you can get a letter from your CPA, which is what I did, that just testified to that. But yeah, there's websites that'll just literally look at your tax statements and make sure your AGI is above 200K twice.
But typically the syndication offering will want you to submit that letter.
Yeah, they want proof of it. And it's for their safety too. The reason that they are able to get that status as a syndication, a private equity fund, that sort of thing, is because they're only allowing accredited investors. So if they would get in trouble if you snuck in. It would be bad for them.
There's like a SEC violation.
Yeah, it'd be an SEC violation. Mm-hmm. And I think that rule's in place. They're just trying to, the assumption is that if you have that much money, that you're good with money and that you're not going to get taken advantage of by a company who doesn't know what they're doing, basically.
Right. You don't want the Wolf of Wall Street making you spend all your money on penny stocks, basically.
Yeah. And an average person, doesn't necessarily have the financial IQ to determine whether it's a good deal or not.
Right. Got it.
Well, I would say this. Obviously, you got started with very little, but we have a lot of listeners who haven't gotten started in real estate. So what would you tell a first-time investor on how to get started?
Yeah, I would say I think the first step is starting to surround yourself with people who are doing it, because for the average person, real estate investing sounds scary and big and overwhelming. And so if you have actual examples of people who are just normal people like yourself, you'll be surprised and amazed to see how normal real estate investors are. You can start to imagine it for yourself. And so I think that's a first step. So going to like local RIA groups, being on Bigger Pockets, networking that way, literally taking out somebody for coffee is a big way that I grew.
100%,
just every time I went to an event, it was always on my goal to ask somebody out who I thought was smarter than me and more further along in their journey, and I would just take them out and I would ask them what do they think I should do, and I would do it.
What's funny is like I've done that as well, and you don't always they're not always smarter than
Yeah,
you.
they're not always,
Sometimes
yeah.
they're brasher. They're, everybody has their flaws.
Yeah,
and
of
they're,
course.
Everybody's a unique person. So never get intimidated and just
Yeah.
put yourself out there and find out.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
know?
You can just learn from.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
it's a good learning opportunity either way, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Like I said, and you might find ways that you can add value to that person.
Yeah.
Maybe there's something that they're missing or that you're good at, whether it's professional, personal, etc., that you can add value to their life too.
Yeah, I encourage you, like, take them out to coffee, figure out, what can you learn from them, but also what can you provide back to them, because that's going to be the person, or those will be the people you call when you're trying to figure out if your deal's any good. And so you want to make sure that they like you, that they want to answer that phone call, that you've brought something to their life. And so, yeah, it's a great way to build a network.
Oh, I love it.
Mm-hmm.
Fantastic. Yeah, and if for our listeners, if someone wanted to kind of follow you and find out more about your coaching or your real estate world or eventually your book, where's the best place to find you?
Yeah, so I'm just starting to launch it. It'll probably be out in the next week or two, but mentalwealththerapist.com will be the URL. Same thing for Instagram, Mental Wealth Therapist. So I'll be launching that in the next few weeks, and my book will be called Being Rich is Gay.
I love that.
So also we'll have an Instagram at some point. That's further out. We've only got a few chapters done, and it's going to take at least a year, so that'll be a little further out.
Fantastic. Great. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. We really appreciate your time and your insight, and wish you the best.
Yeah, thanks, guys.
All right, thank you.